Hello, my name is Nefesha Ruth with blackfolkart.com. I'm sitting with Kámbrya Bailey.
Hey everyone.
Welcome, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Me too.
Okay, let's get into this conversation.
Yes.
Because we'll sit here and talk.
We will. That is one thing we can do. Is sit and talk.
So we're going to sit and talk.
Yeah.
You want to introduce yourself? Like, who are you?
Yeah, that's perfect.
That's a good start.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah.
So I'm Kámbrya Bailey. I am an artist. I am a mother. I'm a cooker. I'm a lover of many things. I'm a believer. I am a sculptor, poet, all around just a curious person.
Photographer.
Yeah, photographer. So I do, even though that's not like, it's like a side thing. Because you tell me we do photography and they're like, oh.
And it's like, oh.
And I'm like, wait.
Not like that.
super novice with it. But yes, I do take pictures. I enjoy photography and art direction. So I do dabble in that as well. And graphic design is something I've recently become more passionate about, especially during the pandemic when I wasn't able to go to the art store for everything.
Right.
I started downloading software and playing around on my tablet, and that also became another love of mine.
Right.
Like a couple years ago, a bunch of my friends let me body paint them and then take pictures.
Oh,
in
nice.
Our art studio, yeah. So on the KB Optics page, there's the Colored Girls Uninterrupted series, and that's what that was. That was so much fun.
We got KB Optics right here.
Yeah, so that is the photography. I decided to just completely wipe my social media and just kind of put things into different lanes just to stay organized. Because I guess another part of me was kind of apprehensive with branching out in that way, just because I was trying to take a step back from social media. But I'm okay with using it, as the tool for what it is. And so I would just want to optimize that. So yeah, now we're coming into some of these very beautiful shots of these beautiful ladies. So, okay, you scroll down just a little bit more because there's more to there. So when I originally did this project, Colored Girls Uninterrupted, I wanted to take quote unquote colored girls, color them with all of these colors and kind of have that as a double entendre with the fact that even though we're women of color, there are still so many parts of us and we're very complex, very creative, very beautiful, ethereal, raw. And I wanted to visualize that and honestly just have fun. Like these shots came out, I mean, even honestly, I was astounded because this was my first time doing like an actual, like a photo shoot and getting people together. And it was incredibly, this looks beautiful, but even looking back at the process, it was very, at least in my mind, it was disorganized because I had no frame of reference for how long these things took. Not everyone was able to take pictures because there were so many, and I was trying to like streamline everything and get people painted and then, okay, get the room together and all of that stuff. But what we did get out of it was a lot of sisterhood. We got great conversation, these beautiful pictures, and we got people to just be vulnerable because we had a roundtable discussion before we got started. And I do remember having questions. I don't remember what they are. But we just talked about our own experiences as young women of color in the collegiate space, in professional spaces, out in the world, navigating, and all from different backgrounds. So like Kennedy, the one with the close-up right here with the green eyes, she's a computer scientist. And she's an entrepreneur as well. She has a brand called Herbora. It's like self-care. She makes candles. It's awesome. Ken's the real deal. And then Danielle, who's in the picture with Kennedy right here, she was an agriculture major, an agribusiness major, and she's in the process of building her own business. She wants to, farming is in her heritage, and so she's very passionate about community gardening, making healthy food accessible, teaching people how to plant and maintain their crops. So I'm very excited for whatever she has going on.
Now, these are your classmates or people in your dorm?
In the dorm, well, actually, we really connected through like extracurriculars and art and stuff because some of these women, most of them actually are grades above me, but through stuff like the poetry club, through school events, we were all able to connect and meet each other because we all had different majors. Like Kennedy, I believe, yes, computer science. Danny was agriculture. Taryn, I forget what Taryn's major was, and Sakira as well, but everyone was in different spaces.
Okay. And
so it was the art that brought us all together originally.
Tell us about your college background.
Okay, so I went to University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, and I chose to go there sight unseen, so I did not see the dorms. I did not.
That's insane.
You know what, it was, but it was definitely the best decision that I could have made for myself at the time. And I just knew I wanted to go to school outside of California. I wanted to go to an HBCU because I wanted a different school experience, because I was coming from a town that was predominantly white, a little bit more diverse now. But a lot of the traumatic experiences that I had associated with that, I can admit that I was definitely seeking healing and community, and what the antithesis of that would have been.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and looking back now, I can definitely see where I had a lot of faulty thinking with that, you know, because like, there's definitely a certain type of energy when you're running from something versus running to something.
Mm.
And so I'm grateful that I was able to get the positive experiences that I did. However, a lot of my experience was definitely colored with the idea that I need to get away from this, expecting things to be different. Even though we were just talking about this earlier, your environment, at least your experience of it, is more reflective of what you've got going on.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely got a lot of that as well. But I got to meet some very amazing people that invested in me, people that I got to invest in, and really, honestly, building some lifelong relationships, friendships, business relationships. And because originally I went to school to become a fashion designer. Fashion is my first love. Well, fashion and science they're both my first loves. And so design is like where they converge together. So it makes sense that I ended up where I did. So I went there on a fashion design major, started in the program. Wasn't really a fan of how they did things, only because like garment construction was something we weren't going to be doing until like our senior year, further along. And a lot of the teaching was it was regressive, it was restrictive. We weren't talking about fashion as if it was an art form or something that was. It's kind of interesting to have fashion design as a major. They didn't teach it like it was something that was going to propel us forward into the world of fashion. Like if this is what you want to do to make it your life's work, there's a way you have to approach it.
Right.
And the program, at least from my experience, didn't reflect that. However, I also take accountability for it. That probably wasn't where I needed to be, because I was like, this really isn't, it wasn't in alignment with what I wanted to do. And I did not feel at home there. I met some cool people, admittedly so, but just the program itself, I'm like, okay, this wasn't a good fit. And so I, was praying, I was talking to my friends, I'm like, okay, I need to change something. I didn't know what, as far as like what major to go to. And mind you, at this point, I hadn't even considered becoming an art major. And even though I've been making art literally since I could do things. So it's in me at this point. Like I was that kid that was staying up in the dorms till 3:00 in the morning sketching. Right. And just making stuff. Like I'm making sketches for classmates, or just working on projects. If I had an idea, I was literally in the common area, just like I had a table, not, much larger than this. I had a whole bunch of like Copic markers, like back when those were huge. So I had Copic markers, colored pencils, my pens, gel pens, and I would very ritualistically set everything out in the way that I wanted to, because it was all going to be a mess by the end of it. But like starting out, I'm like, okay, I got my blues, purple, pinks, reds separated by medium, had my my sketchbook right in the middle, and just went to work. I also had glitter. I was working a lot with glitter.
Oh my God, I hate glitter.
It's definitely, it was tedious. I can tell you, I probably got on a lot of people's nerves, because glitter, even after you clean it up,
it's still there.
It's
the most annoying thing in the world. But it's fascinating too, and it's fun for anybody else that's using it, like yourself.
Yeah, but it was definitely it was interesting, because I would have the glue and adhesive and then have the glitter. So I would do like the actual illustration, and then where I wanted a pop of something, get the glue, dump it on the table, clean everything off, but you would still every now and again flex on the carpet or Cam must have been making artwork.
Oh my gosh.
But I would try my best to clean, I promise.
I think of the artist. Have you seen how do you pronounce her name? Micheline Thomas.
Micheline Thomas? I haven't heard that name before. That's an interesting name.
Yeah, I'll show you her work.
Please do.
She does some glitter stuff, and I always think and they're big pieces. I saw something at the MoMA that she did, and it was so big, and it was glitter, and I was like, that had to have been like a mess of a process.
Hi, I'm Micheline Thomas. I'm here at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. I guess my appeal to craft materials is also another historical reference to women making art when I was in undergrad, I couldn't always afford oil paint. And so because I was in a school and still had to make work, I had to figure out ways in which to still make my art, and not limit myself to, I can't make my art because I don't have oil paint or acrylic paint. So I gravitated toward non-traditional materials that were considered maybe for some a low art, but also to others a high art if you look at outsider artists, right? And so I began going to Michael's craft stores because I could afford felt, and I can afford yarn, and I can afford these little bags of rhinestones or glitter, and I could get like an abundance of those versus to a tube of paint. And so I began to acquire these materials and find meanings and ways to use them in my own work, as a way of identifying myself, but also making an image. That's something that I also push forward with some of my students, is not to limit yourself with what you can't do, but just try to think of what you can do and use those materials that are within your own environment to make something.
But I will say glitter was such a defining medium for me at the time, because one, I like sparkly things, and I like the texture that it added to the pieces, and it kind of gave it like a little, like, I didn't realize it until like looking back, but I really started bridging the gap between 2D and 3D even in the very beginning of my artistic practice. And I didn't see the glitter as that, but that was definitely the beginning of like playing around with like mixed media, if you want to say that. And that was actually the first piece that I made that I submitted to the art department to be in one of their student shows. And it was the first piece to sell for that show, which was kind of crazy. Yeah, that was my first time selling a painting. And it was a really nice, one of the cleaning ladies that worked, she bought it for, I believe, her mother or her auntie. Wow. Yeah.
That is so amazing.
It was like, you want to buy my painting? What? Oh, I was like, yeah. I think I sold it for $60.
Nice.
That was my first time doing that.
And you were still a fashion major at this point?
I was a mass communication major at this point. So I switched to mass comm. Okay. And that's how I got into the art building, because mass communications shared the fine art space. So we had like music, media, theater, and then visual arts. And so even though I wasn't, like I said, an art major, being an artist, I just naturally gravitated towards other artists. And so I had some friends that were in the art department and in the music department and in the poetry club. That was where everyone of all of these different, like, I'll never forget, Verbatim, shout out to you. That was the place where literally people of all majors came together and just snaps all around and just having wonderful conversation. Like, some of the best memories that I have in college were at those poetry meetings. Yeah. Especially my freshman year. Oh, yeah, those were fantastic. And so yeah, that was how I got into the building, was, through those things. And they were having a student sale, and I asked if I could put in some work, even though I wasn't a major, but I'm here, and and a few people knew me, and they were like, oh yeah, sure, that's fine. And so I put some work in, and I came back to the actual to the sale, and the interim chair at the time had seen some of my work, and he had asked, oh, who made this? And now, mind you, I thought I was about to get in trouble, because I'm like, I wasn't a major. I was like, I didn't know if I overstepped or bypassed anything to put my work there. But I was like, oh, that's me, sir. And he was like, you made this? Yes. And he asked if I was an art major. No, was not. And he said, what is it going to take for you to become an art major? And I was honest, and I just kind of went out on a limb here, because I was also kind of strapped for cash, because out-of-state tuition is something else. And my parents were very helpful. However, it's out-of-state tuition. So at that time, it was like, okay, they made me a deal. Like, we'll help you out. You can go for a year, but then since we don't really have that kind of, like, it's just not sustainable right now, you're going to have to come back, and you can choose a CSU. And I was like, okay. But I was praying. I'm like, okay. Because at that point, I had started to get some more friends. I started to get cool with some of my professors, and I really started to feel like I was starting to plant roots. And I was like, okay, but do I really want to? Because college is what you really get out of it. You know, it sounds so cliche, but it's so true. Whatever you put in is what you get out. And that's some of the best advice I can give to anybody listening to this right now. I was like, okay, do I really want to give this up, what I'm having, and start over someplace new, which I'm sure would, you know, have granted me, you know, similar opportunities. I would have been able to meet some awesome people. But there was definitely a pull to be there, and it was kind of difficult to explain because all of the things were pointing like, you know, you need to go ahead and go. Too expensive, far away from home, your family misses you, your sisters miss you, even though you're doing well, you're still a stupid 18-year-old making poor decisions who could probably use some more guidance and supervision. You might as well just leave. Like, you're in a major that you're not really fulfilled in. You're kind of like passing through because you know you have some gifts somewhere here, but you're not really feeling connected to what you're doing. So, but at the same time, I'm like, okay, but I need to be here. And so I just kind of let it go. And I figured that if that was the case, then it was going to happen. And I just had to continue doing what I was called to do, and that was just making art. And so fast forward to that conversation with the chair, he said, what's it going to take for you to become an art major? I said a scholarship, because that was
it's like really important.
That's really important. That's what I need. And I thought he was going to laugh me off because I'm like literally asking for money. Like,
right.
This is, you want me to stay? This is what it's going to take. And he said, there's actually something we can do about that. And unbeknownst to me, apparently, I believe it's called the Wingate Foundation. They had signed a grant to the school, basically gifting them a bunch of money to allocate to all of these different programs, one of which was the Fine Arts program. And a part of that grant, they were going to be able to sponsor 2 students for, I believe, 8 semesters or 2 years, one of those. And they chose me as one of the students to gift that to. And it was a full scholarship, everything, books, tuition, room and board. It wasn't like there was a cap on it. It was more like, name what you need, and we've got that covered for you. So that was a blessing, once in a lifetime type of. I'm like, oh my gosh. And even though I still had to take out, you know, student loans, when I wasn't able to to pay for it, still having that gift, that's honestly what kept me there, because that was the largest thing, was like, how are we going to pay for all of this? And then I was literally like crying, praying, like, go ahead and change my major, become an art major. And so after that, getting connected with Dr. D, Karen DeJarnette, one of the greatest professors I've ever had. She really, now that woman really invests in her students. And what's interesting, at least just from what I've seen, the art department, the math department, and the agro department have the most diverse group of teachers. So like a lot of my professors, because you think you're going to an HBCU, right? It's, mind you, when I applied, I grew up watching A Different World. Okay, it's one of my favorite shows. Yes, it is. Okay, yes, that's my show. I love A Different World. I can hear the theme song, the voices, everything.
My parents love me.
Stand behind me, come what may. Yes.
That is my show.
Yeah. I love that show. And so, mind you, I was thinking like, oh my gosh, if I go to an HBCU, it's going to be like that. All of these people, these mixed race people, black people, African people, exchange students, all of this black excellence that I was going to get and be embraced with. And, you know, and I got a lot of great experience. However, I must say, at least from my experience, it was a different world, but it wasn't a different world.
It was a different world from what you were used to.
It was a different world from what I was used to. So for everyone, I spent most of my life, because I moved around a little bit as a kid. I was born in Corona, California. But I mean, I was like a baby, and I was like 1, and then we moved to Richmond, Virginia, stayed there for a couple years, then moved back to California and stayed within like San Bernardino, Highland, San Bernardino again, and then most of my life though was spent in a little city called Yucaipa, and then Beaumont shortly after. So, and now mind you, Yucaipa, very similar to Clovis, it's very white and very old. And so growing up, all of my, and so it just felt like normal life to me. Like all of the neighborhoods that I lived in, I was used to being either the only black family or one of the only black families like in the space, and being the only black kid in class. That was me. And all of my teachers from 3rd grade up until 12th grade were all white, except for my Spanish teacher, my 4th grade teacher for a little bit, because one thing I'm grateful for, I went to a charter school from 3rd grade up until 8th grade, And what they will do is like you can move at your own pace. So if you test out of the grade that you're working in, they'll bump you up. Not maybe not the whole thing, but they'll bump you up in that subject.
Okay.
So in third grade, I was bored with with language arts and like the reading. I'm like, this, my mom taught me that 2 years ago. My mom, she homeschooled me and my sisters until really from like babyhood up until first grade. Second grade was when we started transitioning into like charter school systems. But yeah, my mom did a really good job with homeschooling. I definitely want to homeschool my kids.
Shout
That's my first.
Mom.
Yeah, really shout out to mom and dad for providing that type of environment for us to live and thrive, especially when we were that young and malleable.
Yeah, that's important. It makes a big difference.
Huge difference to have that consistency, that love, the hands-onness, being able to work at your own pace and to really have security and love so that you can become a well-adjusted kid.
Yeah, like socio-emotionally, it really helps because when you get to school, it's like, whoa, like what is going on?
Right, it's like
Nobody cares.
you're literally like you're literally, that's your first time as a kid being confronted with the rest of the world.
Right.
Outside of your family, outside of like who your inner circle of influence is, all of a sudden it just explodes and you're like, okay, there's tables, there's people, some of them don't look like me, some of them don't speak like me, who is this tall person? I don't know. Adults usually are nice to me. I don't know what this one's about. Like there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
And so it was nice to have a transition and at least be in a space, because like a lot of people think homeschooled kids are weird. Sometimes they are. I'm not even gonna lie to you, but I'm grateful that my mom really just let us be us and really gave us a sense of security so we could go out and be ourselves and not really have a difficult time adjusting to dealing with other people and dealing with other kids,
right,
and dealing with adults and being able to advocate for ourselves and all of that stuff. And that was a part of why I was able to move up. So I was in third grade, and then with English language arts, I was able to move up to fourth grade because I was I was breezing through stuff. My teacher, and it was kind of cute how she did it, Miss Graham. Never forget Miss Graham. And she gave me like an interview style, kind of like how we're sitting now. Okay. And I was kind of confused because what was going on. I didn't know if I was in trouble or what, because she was like, it's just me and her in the classroom. And I still remember the layout of the classroom to this day. It's kind of, it's insane. And she was just kind of just giving me a test. And like we were reading through stuff together. And she was asking me like which grammatical, like where's the grammatical error, or like, stuff like that. And I was like, oh, it's that one right there, or reading stuff. And that test is what they're like, okay, she can go ahead and move up to fourth grade for English language arts. And so for that year, I believe maybe, because it wasn't the whole year, maybe it was a half or 3/4, but the fourth grade teacher at that time, she was a Black lady. And so I got to see her, but at the same time, there was still a very large disconnect. And I mind you, I've never been a Black teacher before. And I could only imagine, especially depending on like what type of environment you're in, but just how to treat children. Well, you should treat everybody, the same, of course, but it definitely felt like there was some sort of a disconnect, because I think sometimes you don't want people to think that you are showing favoritism, especially if you overthink what your position is. And I'm not saying that's where she was, because I don't know this woman, right, and I don't know what her personal life was going through, but however, I don't know, it was something that just kind of came to me just now, just revisiting that time, was saying like, okay, like I don't want to do too much because I don't want people to assume that, I'm trying to single you out, whether it's positive or negative. Right. Because I did get some of that for not just her, but from other teachers as well. So that, it depends. But yeah, so that was the one Black teacher that I had. Even saying Black, I'm not even gonna lie to you, feels so weird, because even as a kid, I'm like, why do we call ourselves Black? Or more importantly, why did we agree to be called Black when our skin is brown? And that's a whole other conversation.
It is a conversation. It
is a lovely conversation.
What are the questions that I want to ask everybody? And I was thinking at the end of every interview, and I might still put it at the end of this interview. Okay. Is like, what is it that you think of when you hear the term Black folk?
Oh, man, I think of a lot of different things. One of the first thing that came to mind was soul food, sadness, confusion, richness. I think, honestly, I think of tragedy, but in a like in the playwright kind of sense.
Okay.
And I think a part of the reason why I think that,
Like an August Wilson film or
kind
play. I mean, his stuff is pretty tragic.
It is pretty tragic. However, I will say maybe not completely tragic, just because the story's not over.
Yeah.
So I can't, definitively say like, okay, this is where it's destined to go.
Mm-hmm.
But just with my own experience, what I've read, what I've seen, even the term black, because I think of dark matter, like I think of the material of the universe. I also think of other things we associate with blackness, like black magic, the Black Plague, Black Death. And personally, I don't believe there's any coincidence with why we correlate those things, and then on the other flip side also have black people. And I think so often, like as a people, and you know what I'm saying, like as a people, I'm talking about us, y'all know who I'm talking about. We definitely, there's something about what we have where we have this innate need and want to reclaim things and to restore them, which in and of itself is a very beautiful thing. However, I think that sometimes that can be weaponized against us. And I think that it has been. I think that people have realized that there's a very potent energy around very melanated people and how we choose to navigate through the world. And that's a part of why when things are really good, they're excellent. And when things are really bad, they're extremely tragic. And I think we have to take accountability for both, because there is a regality and a royalty that comes with this.
Absolutely.
And I think within the last 10 years, there's definitely been a resurgence of like the reclamation of like this quote unquote like black girl magic. I'm just keeping it within the realm, right? And like queendom, my king, my queen. However, one of the largest things that makes a ruler is accountability and leadership. And I think a lot of us want the glory without the accountability. And that does not exist. And when you try to pursue the glory or try to emulate that, try to dive into what that can mean without taking the responsibility and the accountability that comes with the weight of a crown, you get something that's very entitled and lost.
It'll destroy you.
It's self-destructive.
Yeah.
It's very destructive. And so I think with the blackness, so to speak, and mind you, I'm okay with using this term, especially in this context, because you understand what I'm saying when I say it. But within the term of like blackness, I'll try to explain it the way that I've heard it before in conversations. So people will use like the examples that I gave with like, okay, yeah, the Black Death, the Black Plague, the Black whatever. And all of these are very negative. They're associated with death and destruction, really, and chaos. And not in chaos is change, but chaos is something to be avoided, something to be destroyed, something to be subdued. And then we have black people. I've heard people say, oh, well, we have black people, and then people chose to name these other things and associate them with blackness. And that's why we have to further cleave to the notion that we are black and blackness is beautiful. And personally, I believe that's inverted. And I think that these things have already been established in a lot of ways, and then they attach that to black people. And when you keep people, and I see a lot of this now especially, but honestly, the more I watch more media, especially more black media, African American, Aboriginal American, however you want to couch that, especially from the 70s and 80s, you learn a lot of these talking points are nothing new. And the fact that we've kind of convinced ourselves that this is a new conversation really, I think, is what takes us in a lot of different directions, some of which may not be so helpful or constructive, rather. Because the conversations that they've been happening before Twitter, before Reddit, before Instagram, before YouTube, before podcasts, people were having talk shows, whether it's Phil Donahue, even before Oprah.
Well before Oprah.
Well before.
Yeah.
Well before.
There's a conversation with Muhammad Ali, where he's talking about blackness and like, why do we use this term, or why is it used in such negative connotations when we talk about our environment and the things that mean or don't mean have meaning for us. So yeah, and so that conversation has been going on for a long time, but we have to know our history to know that the conversation's been happening.
Yes.
And like many articles have been written about it by our intellects over, years, generations.
Yeah. And personally, I think because words have so much power, the notion that so many people are hooked onto, okay, well, this is a black thing, or this is a black, I'm like, honestly, sometimes it sounds like you're cursing yourself. That's how it sounds.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a veracity behind it. Like, okay, like I have to make myself known and to affirm myself through this word, through this lens. And honestly, sometimes that can be very restrictive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you keep people so fixated on affirming what their identity is, they're very easy to manipulate, because you're focused on literally what's skin deep and surface level. When we talk about diversity, the first thing people think about isn't diversity of thought. It's not diversity of mind. It's how many different shades of people do you have in a space?
Mm-hmm.
How many people that aren't white do you have in a space? And I think the more, and what happens, it's underneath the guise of acceptance and underneath the guise of awareness. And I think people that are on the ground and doing that work believe that it's a good thing, and believe that in a lot of ways it has been, as far as diversifying spaces and getting different perspectives into spaces. However, I think, again, when we focus so much on the colorful terms, if you will, without looking at the history behind certain things, it can, especially when you tie it so close to an identity, it can take us down a very destructive path, honestly, that kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
And like there's not a, and now mind you, I haven't been here on this planet for very long.
How old are you? I'm going to share with everybody.
I am 23, so I'm 23. So I haven't been here for very long, so I don't have all the answers, right? And so I hold space for that. However, at the same time, I know what I know, and I know what I don't. And it just, okay, where was I going? Because I was literally, before I said I haven't been here for very long,
right.
I was about to make
You're about to go somewhere with that?
I was about to go
I may
somewhere
have thrown
with
you
that.
off.
No, it's okay. If it's important, it'll circle back around.
Yeah, it'll come back.
That's always the philosophy with that.
Yeah.
What was I about to say? Because it was about like affirming the, what did I just say right before I said I hadn't been here for very long?
You were talking about the like if you are speaking certain things and then you can like in a sense curse yourself.
Oh yeah, self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Cursing, all of that stuff. Identity. That right. This is where I was going to go with that. Is that typically, at least it seems like when you're in a space where you're actually embodying and pursuing peace and making peace with how you navigate the world, there comes a sense of resolve when you do that, and with how you move, how you emote, how you express yourself, how you interact with people, how you carry yourself. There's a resolve that's there, right? If you're embodying the affirmation of, okay, this is how, and this is also the thing too, I think when we make ourselves the center rather than making spirit the center, than making God the center, I think that also is where we go all kinds of ways. Mm-hmm. And so when you realize, okay, so this is how God has made me, this is how I've arrived in the world, when you continually make peace with that and gain wisdom, I feel like there's a sense of resolve that sets in. Mm-hmm. However, so many conversations I'm seeing that are surrounding identity specifically, you can do this however you want to, there's no resolve. There's a lot of distress. There's a lot of destruction. There's a lot of, not fragility, but franticness. There's a very frantic energy surrounding a lot of these conversations. Mm-hmm. And it's that alone. Even if the words sound nice, even if the intention is positive, the energy surrounding so much of these identity conversations is very frantic. Mm-hmm. And by virtue of that, I take a step back and I encourage anyone who cares about having conversations that push the larger conversation forward about how we relate to ourselves and relate to one another as people, as brothers and sisters. When that frantic energy enters the room, that's not a call to action, it's a call to step back and to reflect and to recollect and re-examine and not be afraid to re-examine, whether it's re-examining language, whether it's re-examining thought processes, whether it's re-examining even the history that we've studied. And more importantly, not just the history, but how the history has been used to inform certain narratives. Because if we're supposed to be pursuing peace, then really it shouldn't matter when people disagree with you. And when they do, there has to be a sense of compassion that's there. because you recognize, just like I'm trying to navigate through the world as I believe I've been called to, this person can only do that very same thing. And if that's not in alignment with where I am, that's not a call for me to exact my will. It's a call to maybe ask questions if they're open to having a conversation. It's a call to conversation, but not a call to constrict. And I think that there's a lot of that happening. And I think that comes with kind of circling back around to accepting labels, when it comes to blindly accepting labels about things with blackness, black people. And rather than asking, and I'm sure there are plenty of people who've been asking the question, there are plenty of people who believe they have subscribed the answers to those questions. And I just kind of want to continue that conversation for a new generation of people, especially people that are in my age group, because I think there's a lot of that isn't happening. I hear a lot of yelling.
Well, everybody, especially now because of like social media, everybody has, it's like the feature in the last magazine that I did, Jason Moss, he said it's not about who's the best, it's about who's the loudest. So everybody is trying to sound louder or be louder than the next person so that they can be heard, because everybody at this point has some form of a platform, whether that's good or bad, and they're building audiences around what they're saying. And it's not always the most healthy thing to hear everybody's voice, I don't think, at least. Sometimes, like, I've been in experiences in life where it's like, I have to cut a lot of voices out so I can hear. Because if I can't hear God clearly, then I can't move forward. I can't trudge the path that I'm supposed to be on. And suddenly I find myself on somebody else's path. Yeah. And so I think it's, like, necessary to not, overwhelm yourself with everybody's voice and all these different thoughts. We live in a country, and I'll just stick with a country that is incredibly, like, it's full of contradictions. And so, like, as I'm listening to you're saying one thing and then you say however, and it's like, and you have to, because you have to explain, like, okay, this is this, but however, we also have these other, pieces of the puzzle that we're trying to piece together. And we're, as a people, are piecing together identity. And
there's so many angles.
There's so many angles. Everybody has different thoughts on who we are, where we came from, what we're supposed to do. But one thing that I do know is that when it comes to peace, the process to get to peace is oftentimes full of turmoil or what looks like destruction. Yeah. And it looks like, okay, this is falling apart. And then, okay, we've made it through the metaphoric Red Sea. We have to get through to get to the other side, to this place of peace. So it's like, even with the terminology, it was something I thought about a lot of. And I was recently watching an interview with Thelma Golden and two other artists, and right now their names are skipping my mind. But anyway, I was at the Q&A section, and there was a guy on there. His name was Eve Kemp, and he asked a question. I actually reached out to him recently. We talked on Instagram, which was really dope, and I found him from this interview. I didn't even see his face. Wow. I just heard his question, and I found him. And he was asking the question about blackness, and Thelma Golden was like, I've come to the conclusion of I'm not going to continue to kind of have that conversation, because I keep having this conversation. And it was about, like, creating these culturally specific spaces. And she runs the Studio Museum in New York, which is created for Black people, for people of the diaspora. And it is a challenging thing. Like, even when I was creating this magazine and website, it was like, do I want to use the term Black? Well, you have to use something that people understand too. And I think that's important too. And it's a challenge of, like, I would prefer it to be some other term, and I don't really have the term. And I think we've gone through this Negro to African American to I'm Black and I'm proud. And, like, where do we settle on terminology? It's such an ongoing conversation, and I think that the people of the next generation or the generation after might have some cool solutions for this. But I think that you also do have to be connected with the people.
Yeah,
and,
with
like,
your audience.
Yeah, your audience. Like, what do they understand?
Yeah, like,
as a whole.
And that's a part of why I even said, like, I'm using this term because I know you know what I mean when I say that. Yeah. Even though we're having a term about deconstructing this and, like, why, at the same time, in order to keep, like, to keep people on the same page, sometimes it is important to speak the same language as the people you're trying to reach. So
yeah,
there's that balance.
It's a challenge.
Well. It is a challenge,
yeah.
but it's also worth it though. Because I'm like,
we have to.
You have to do that.
You can't step away from it and say, well, I'm just not going to deal with that. I think that we need to have the conversation so that we can come to some conclusions, some answers, and kind of have a little bit of peace inside, like internally, and to also look critically at our past, so that we can, like you said, you're going to have some things in the past that you can definitely glean from to move forward, and some things it's like, okay, that was the past, but now what are we going to do? Like, yeah.
And I think for me, at least something that's helped is identifying less with what's on the outside in that regard, and really identifying with, okay, what is God's character and what is the character that God has given me, and how am I going to optimize that to do what I'm called to do, right? And so identifying more with that has really freed me from a lot of stuff, because I'm still curious, I'm still invested to have the conversation and to have, the wherewithal to contribute my perspective and to hopefully expand the perspective of other people, because that's really all I can do. I can't give you answers. I can only provide you with a perspective, and that's literally that's the best thing that I could do, right? And so, but I know for me in my own personal life though, prioritizing what's on the inside has really helped free me from a lot, because even though I recognize like my cultural heritage, racial heritage, it's a part of who I am, and I've had a lot of experiences that have been, for lack of a better term, colored through that, of course. I know who I am at my core is far more sacred than what someone could ever call me, or what I could call myself. But it's, how does God see me? And I lead from there. And everything else, other things are important, but I don't tether my soul to that. And I think a lot of people have their souls tethered to what the world has to say.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of the inner turmoil comes from. Because of course the process of like tethering, untethering, figuring out, fixing, I think, and I really liked your comment earlier, like that stuff can look like destruction, because so often the path to peace is colored with that. And so I think that's definitely a part of it. But I definitely still believe like the inner peace, a lot of that, it comes from, okay, shifting that perspective to inside out, not outside in. And the older I've gotten and the more involved I've gotten in different spaces or researching different belief systems, so much of what we have to offer is outside in. Even if you use pretty language to describe it, even if we talk about whatever's earthly, whatever you want to call it, it's still outside in, not inside out. And I think when you lead with that, that's where a lot of the missteps could come in, or like the franticness comes in.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that when you, like you said earlier about identity, when someone focuses on identity, it's easy to manipulate. It's easy to get someone to do or whatever. I mean, it's the root of colonization. Like, it was like, and there's these people and then these group of people, but before the colonizers in so many spaces, people were thriving, and then we kind of come in and take that on, I think, and we create these differences even amongst one another, whether it's light skin, dark skin. It's very superficial, and it's not anything about inward. It's not about, are you a kind person? Do you know how to love? Do you have compassion for one another? If you can get stuck on identity, you can really miss a lot of things. And I think identity is really important, because I think of culture, I think of cultural heritage, I think of what has been passed down and what needs to continue, like, which is really important, which is a part of why I started Black folk art too, because I'm like, there's certain things that we're missing that we can't just let go of. But at the same time, we do need to grow, and we need to go past certain things also. So we need to filter and figure out what are those things.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And like when you had mentioned colonization, the first thing, especially when you were talking about the effects of that, the first thing that came to my mind is like the spirit of separation ultimately is what, like at the root of how that's affected the rest of the world. It's definitely that. So across racial lines, across ideological lines, across gender lines, like it's this continual cutting through, and in a house divided against itself can't stand.
Right.
And so the more you get, like, we internalize certain things, and it's like that just kind of begins to work for itself.
Yeah.
And so I think it's why conversations like these are so important, to be able to continue to bridge gaps
Yeah.
Just to further stuff. That's why
Exactly.
I live for stuff like this.
Yeah, exactly. I love even the challenging nature of conversations like this, where it makes you begin to think outside of the box that your mind has maybe created, or or that you've been taught. You know, like we so much of what we think is what we have received from others, rather than like, you know, trying to create some form of original thought, if that exists. But there's influence everywhere.
Definitely.
Which is why I think that having moments of isolation are necessary. And I think that artists probably are some of the rare beings that really do take moments of isolation to really think about what's happening and not just keep going. Yeah. Like, what does that look like for you when you're in the studio and you're creating?
Laying out my tarp and setting the easel up, putting on some good music or a podcast. And sometimes I come to the canvas with a clear-cut idea of like, okay, this idea came to me. This is how I want to execute it. I'm, you know, steady enough to just go ahead and move forward with what I have, and then flexible enough to adjust as it goes. And then sometimes I'm like, you know, I just feel the need to make something. And then I'll just intuitively put something together. So I've had both of those experiences and plenty in between. And so recently, especially because I've been taking a break from painting to take that space to just, like just cleaning out everything, cleaning out my diet, and not just what I eat, but also like my social media, everything that I use on a consistent basis. I'm like I'm running a fine tooth comb through it. And with my Instagram, because I use that fairly often, whether I'm checking messages or actually posting my work, that's where I post most of my the stuff that I've done publicly and like release and everything. And I just unfollowed most of the people that I was following. Like it's underneath 75, I think, at this point.
That's good.
And yeah, I just realized I'm like, that's so congested. And I'm like, okay, Spirit, what do I need to take off of here? Like the people that I'm following because I think I'll be connected to these people, take off. The people that I'm following just because I was like, you know what? Follow. Just, you know, sometimes you don't even think about it. And I was like, no, I don't want anything that's coming from that kind of energy isn't something that I want in my, like I see my profile, that's like my box spring, my little home base for how I navigate social media. And so I want to keep that as intimate and as authentic as possible. And so for me, that was important I deleted most of my pictures that I had on there because there was just so many. It documented so much of my artistic journey from like 2019 up until now. And so I still have pictures from each year and an era, but I just wanted to just kind of run a comb through it and get rid of what I would consider excess and just kind of cut down to, okay, what's necessary, what's efficient, what feels the closest to the core of what I'm trying to do. And yeah, I even cut out some followers too, honestly. Like I got rid of some stuff just to sever ties with, you know, energy. And that's the thing, like it's never anything negative, it's just about what's in alignment. And I think when you look at it from that space and you're not so, because I used to be someone who was super focused on how are other people going to react to this, and that would keep me stuck. And I'm sure I'm not the only person who's felt that way.
Yeah, we all probably go through that.
Yeah, definitely.
To some level, yeah.
And so with this, especially because I realized, okay, it really is, you know, not to be over dramatic, but it really is life or death. It really is livelihood or, you know, distraction. And thinking about it that way, I'm like, okay, I really can't, it's not worth the cost. So yeah, just continuing to clean stuff out, swiped YouTube, wiped Twitter, everything. And like, you know what, I don't want to be a hoarder of information. Yeah. Because I think that's also just like, you know, you get backed up if you eat too much and you're not regular. It's the same thing up here with what you intake. And we're so like hyper stimulated, hoarding onto information, consuming so much information. When you don't give your body time to digest stuff properly, then you get constipated, and people wonder why. We're dealing with a lot of like head fog, mental stuff, because there's a lot of congestion going out in here.
It's so interesting, like I would do connecting two things, what you're saying right now, and I want to go back to your studio space too. But okay, during COVID, it was a time where everything kind of slowed down. But one of the side effects to COVID that I experienced when I first got it was a brain fog. And I thought, that's so interesting. I hated it because I couldn't think clear. I had to lay in bed for a couple days just to get my brain to... I was just watching shows because I couldn't really do too much else. And I'm used to using my brain like at a high level,
Mm-hmm.
constantly reading or, writing or creating something, and I just couldn't do what I usually do.
Okay.
And so I felt thrown off in that way and frustrated in that way. And I rested and I got, what I needed.
Mm-hmm.
But also the brain fog that happens with our social media generation.
Mm-hmm.
And it does create like a fog in our brains where we can't process because we never take the time to process.
Yeah.
Like if I'm taking something in, I have learned over the years that I might have these hyper moments of intake.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with that because it's like you're going to school in a sense. And I'm very intentional about what I take in and how I'm taking it in. I spend time reading. I spend a lot of time reading, and then I match my reading up with what I'm viewing.
Okay.
So it's always a very intentional information gathering process for me. It's not just random.
Yeah.
It's very intentional. I don't have a TV for that reason. Like, if I want to watch something, I'm going to intentionally search it on YouTube, and it's going to match what I'm learning right now. It's not going to be too random. If I want to watch a movie, then I'll find something to watch. And I'm pretty particular about the movies I watch, too. But over time, I realized that's my process, and it works. And when I've taken in everything that I need to take in that moment, I don't really have a desire to take anything else in. So then I'll like listen to music. Like right now I'm in a space where I've been listening to a lot of music.
Okay.
And then I'll go through moments, like week-long moments where I don't listen to any music. Because I just am aware to what's happening in my process of taking in the constant energy that around me.
Yeah.
And like protecting my space and my energy. And so I think it's a process that people have to learn. And it's not something that I just woke up and just did. It was really, literally over the last like 2 years, being really intentional about what I'm putting in my body, whether it's like visually, sonically, food that I eat and all of that. One of the books that really helped me with food was called Eat Smarter.
Okay.
That was a good one. And it talks about the food that you can eat that really enhances your brain and how it's functioning. Because I wanted personally to I wanted my brain to, what do they call it? The neurological pathways, just
like
to
rewire
some of my neurological pathways, make sure that I was healing from some of my things in my past, and I knew that eating had to do with that. And then I wanted to just be able to be sharper, and it really did. It changed my life when I began to be intentional about my eating, and the different, like blueberries are a big part of my diet, almonds, walnuts, things that are brain food, and then taking in a lot of water and just making sure that I'm eating healthy in that way. But also, again, with all the other things that I'm taking in, being intentional about those things, and not, one more thing before I hop back to you. What another person that really influenced me was, I call her my godmother, the Afro-minimalist, Christine Platt. She's amazing, and she hits me up occasionally, and really encouraging woman. And have you heard of her book?
I have heard of her.
Okay.
I've heard of her, not her book, but I've heard of the Afro-Minimalist.
Yeah. So she talks about conspicuous consumption, and something that you were saying really brought me to that, where you were talking about things that you're taking in, not necessarily like objects or tangible objects, but these things that, whether it's TV, social media, music, whatever it is that you're taking in and you're consuming, and we are consumers of everything around us.
Right.
And we need to be intentional consumers and not just be just taking everything in because it's there. Like, you don't eat everything just because it's there.
Yeah.
Some things are not healthy for you, some things, and whatever it might be, you don't do it. Really thinking about what you're consuming, and not just, I'm going to get this because whether it's I have the money for it or it's there and I want it. Like, really being intentional about that. One more thing. I think that fasting is really important when it comes to that, and not just fasting food, but like taking moments to fast various things that you realize, like, I need to take a break from that. I took a 6-month social media break this year, and it was great. Like, I needed it.
Yeah, oh my gosh, it's been a minute since I've taken like a formal social media fast. The last one that I did was about 3 to 4 months, and that was like last year sometime. And that was some of the most freeing
Yeah.
time. Like, it's crazy how much time we actually spend on social media when you take it out and you're like, oh, all this free time.
Right.
And honestly, if I wasn't in an industry where social media was a huge part of how we connect, then I wouldn't have it. But as an artist, as an artist, as a visual artist, as a graphic designer, most of my clientele are on Instagram, on Twitter, looking for, can someone do a logo? Can someone do this and that? Looking for things. And, that's also how people, get to see your work. And so it's like, why not use it,
Right.
And so that's why it's here for that. But honestly, I would love to work to get to a space where even that's not necessary.
Yeah.
Where it's like a phone call, hey, Cam, we need you here.
Exactly.
Or, hey, I need this painting done by this time. Hey, we're doing this mural project. If I could just be reached by my phone and have my email, that's the space that I want to work to without all of the extra stuff. And to be able to, to work with enough people and to have enough community to where I wouldn't even need to post things anymore. Like if I was, like, for example, if I was working with like a nonprofit and we're doing like a mural project and an art accessibility project, through their company, they would put out what needs to be put out if they're having me on or something, but not having my own social media unless I got like an assistant. But I don't think I would do something like that. But
assistants aren't bad in that way. It just depends on how you utilize your assistant, I think.
Yeah, and it's not even that it's bad, but it's just to cut out the social media.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I get what you're saying.
I'm sure assistants are great, but I'm just like,
I need an assistant.
No, not like that.
But I get it.
I mean, you are a literal Renaissance woman who wears many hats, so I'm sure having an assistant would be fantastic.
One day.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Nothing against assistants. It was about just cutting out the social media. Like, I don't need to be on it, and
Yeah.
So
No, I think that a lot of artists feel that or have that same sentiment because we would rather be creating and like I don't want to sit here and have to be on social media and marketing. I was talking to an artist yesterday about that, and she's like not wanting to do that, and it's a part of why I started the magazine, because I'm like, how can we get other artists their content out and hopefully reach people in a way that they don't have to like be consumed with this system that has been created where it's just all consuming. And if somebody messages you, you're like, we talked about this before we started. It's like, oh shoot, I gotta send this message back. And like, do you really right away? Like, can we give each other a little bit of grace? And some people like understand that and some people don't. So it's just,
bottom line.
And
to your point, as far as like getting further involved in like the rabbit hole of the posting and the social media and the social currency and everything, I had a conversation with someone close to like a month and a half ago, and we were talking about my art and marketing and everything like that, and they had asked me, they're like, why don't you ever really take pictures with your artwork? Like, there's some photos of you on your page, but you don't really have a lot of that. Like, why don't you do that? And then before I could answer, they went ahead and tagged on, you're a very beautiful woman, nice face, nice body. What would it kill you to stand next to one of your pictures? That might get more eyes on it. That might get more this. You have that gift. Use it. And I'm like, but see, here's the thing. And then this person, obviously he had said, like, you as a woman, and also I'll never forget him saying this, like, you have to realize the power that you have with that. And my thing is, because I get what he's saying, or what he was saying, and because I know I have that power, that's a part of why I don't lead with that.
Right.
And it was something that was difficult for him to understand, with like, but this is what works, this is what sells, this is how you get more eyes, this is how you reach people. And I'm like, I know that. I've been on social media. I see what my Explore page looks like. I see what draws people in, what not what secures people, but I've seen what seduces people.
Right,
and
exactly.
And there's definitely, like, I think there's even a book, like The Art of Seduction, and it's not even expressly sexual, but it's about knowing how to connect with people in a certain type of way.
Right.
But at the same time, though, the way in which we would be doing that, especially with social media, a lot of it is just purely seduction and entrancement. And for me, especially because I know what power that holds, that's a part of why I don't lead with that.
Right.
And why I would rather my work speak for itself.
Yeah.
It's like when people see me, they gonna see me. Because like I have a few videos up there, I have a few, reels of my face so people know I'm a person. Like, this is my work, But when I post my work, it's just the work, unless it's a part of a larger like multimedia project. And I think that's like a part of why I'm hesitant to do that is because that's another layer of engaging with the system and with the matrix, rather than letting things rather than letting stuff speak for itself, tacking things on. And I know it's a part of marketing, it's a part of what you do, but I realized that hasn't really been in alignment for me. And honestly, to a certain extent, I'm grateful that I don't feel the pull to do that. Like even today, when you're like, oh, we're gonna be filming instead of doing audio, and I was like, really? So like even though it blindsided me, and I don't mind being in front of the camera and getting used to that again, but I know that's something that I do rarely, unless it's a full body yes, then I'll do it. And that's why I'm like, this was a full body yes, to be like, it's cool. But it's definitely another layer of that. Like I'm not just an artist, but I'm a beautiful woman who makes art, and this is why you should look at my stuff. And then you also draw in a different type of audience. And even, and like I was telling this person, like even though I don't lead with that, but people still know what I look like. I have gotten people that have tried to use my art to get to me and not in a way that's productive. So because that's already happened, and because I know what's out there, like it's not about me, but it's about recognizing the access to the audience that I have. And could I expand my audience in a certain way? Probably. But is it quality over quantity though?
Right.
And so because that's the focus, I'm kind of glad I'm in a space where, because that's been something that I've been praying, like the ability to disconnect from this but still connect more with people. And honestly, that's been coming true in a lot of ways. Like I rarely, like I'll check my Instagram for messages, like with the like group chats and stuff. I'll post a piece if I really want to put that out there or pin something to my account. But after that, I'm glad I barely check it now, especially after having my other work posted on their own platforms.
Right.
It's like if people want to see my pictures, you can go here. You want to see my graphic design, you can go there. You want to reach me, email. For those of you that have my phone number, do that. And it's been a lot more hands off.
Yeah. No, I think that's really good that you're able to see that. Especially at your age, because like a lot of people, it's all about attention grabbing, and it's not so much about the content and the work and the spirit behind it. And I think it's such a process for people to get to that place a lot of times where they can understand that, oh, you can be beautiful, you can be all of these things, and you can have a lot of numbers and not be satisfied, and you can have a lot of people saying, oh, I love your work, and not be fulfilled even monetarily. There's a lot of people with a lot of numbers on Instagram that are not receiving the monetary success that they expect or that they want. So I think that's just an important lesson to learn in life. I'm glad you're putting your work first in that way. You do, so as you were talking, I was thinking about how you do a lot of like black and white, your most recent photography project. Is that what you would call it, a photography project?
Yeah, like a photo series.
Series. It's like black and white, and you can tell us about that a little bit, and I'll pull it up here. But also, you have a lot of color, which we saw when it comes to the Brown Body, the Colorful series, Colored Girls series that you did. And also with your collages that I've seen you do, they're very colorful. So, as I pull that up, you can tell us a little bit about that. Where do you want to start?
Oh, gosh, we can scroll further down, because there's... How many do we have here? Let's see.
Keep scrolling.
You keep scrolling because I think there's...
I like that one.
Thanks. Now those were fun to do.
They look like it. And then you have this like, okay, so I want to get into so many things. The science, because you're into science, and that's clear. But also this like, what is this? How would you describe your look here? In your designs. Okay.
That first one right there. This one.
Let's bring it back to the beginning.
This is the very beginning. This actually is a still. So it's
a heart.
It's an animation actually. So one of my friends, he had sent me a graphic he wanted me to draw, and it was.
Goodness. Hold on. Start over. Okay. I'm gonna stop with this damn mouse.
Mouse, but okay. So he sent me a graphic that he wanted me to draw, and it was basically 2 koi fish, and then a brain and a heart on either side.
Okay, I could see the heart, yeah.
And it's actually an animation of the koi fish. This is one of the first animations I ever did. So I hand drew the koi fish, did the thing, and then I animated it so it looked like they were swimming around each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it looked like they were underneath the water. And I need to find that animation. But on Procreate, the software that I was using to animate this, there's I found this kind of on accident, but I'm glad that I did. That is all of the layers of the animation posted onto one space.
Oh, okay.
And so it created this very beautiful watercolory, just the motion, the synergy of it. I fell in love with it, and how the colors were so much lighter and a little bit more airy and bright, because the illustration, the fish it's very saturated. But this contrast where you can see, like, it almost kind of looks like a printer running out of ink in certain areas, but it kind of provides a little bit of depth to it, and you can see the strokes with the hearts and the scales and the fish, and it was just a very beautiful piece, and it's one of my favorite ones. Like, I just get very calm looking at it, honestly. Like, I would love to see that as some sort of like a pendant and just have it.
It reminds me of mandalas and how you have like that kind of like, it's circular, and then it like takes you to that middle, and it creates this depth in there, which is really nice.
Yeah.
I like that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's one of my favorites.
It is really peaceful.
It is.
Yeah.
It's tranquil.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes me think of, too, your healing adult coloring book, and we'll have to get back to that.
Yes, we will.
All right.
Okay. And then, there's fashion and science are my first loves. Design is where they meet. But if you scroll up a little bit, I started getting into making dreamscapes.
Mm-hmm.
And this was still when I was like in the beginning of experimenting with Procreate and just figuring out what could I do with this. And I started layering stuff. Because I see a lot of different things in my dreams. It's where a lot of like my color schemes come from. So there's always just very electric but soft colors. And I knew I wanted to make something with a whole lot of dimension. Like, I wanted to literally, what I did for each of these, I made a gradient, and then I just decided to abstract and shape it. So all of these colors, they're literally are cut from the same original piece, and they're just skewed differently. And I wanted to make, like, how can I make an intricate world with using the same things layered on top of each other and playing with direction. And that's where these came from. And at a time where there was so much that was uncertain, like the pandemic really, at least for me, it put me in a space. I'll always say 2020 was the best year of my life to date, because so much clarity came out of that year and so much strength. And it really it put me in a position where I had to I had nothing to do but sit down, and most importantly, sit with myself. Like, really, it slowed everything down that needed to be slowed down. And I really got to be in my cocoon, and I got to really observe my family. I got to make some very difficult decisions. Like, I was a newly single mom at that time by my own choice, and that in and of itself was an adjustment. And so there were a lot of things that were changing at that time. And so delving into my art, like, even just looking back at it now, like, so much of it was very reflective of where my mind was and where my heart was postured at the time. Like, I was in the middle of literally letting go of a previous reality and really being put in a space that kind of forced me to start grafting a new one with the same sheet. And
right.
So my artwork was like literally reflecting that. And so it's kind of crazy to look back at it now and be like, dang, that's literally 2020. That's what was going on.
In your dreams, you literally like see these concepts in your dreams?
A lot of the time, yeah. Like, I'll see whether it's in a room or something that's in the water. I always have a lot of dreams where there's water involved. And that doesn't surprise me, because I love the water. I've always have. So whether I'm underwater or there's flowing water or it's still, or there's the ocean. There's always something, and these are usually abstracted versions of stuff that I've seen in dreams. And particularly with this color scheme, there was a dream that I had, and it was so interesting. We were out at sea, and it was a bunch of people, not too many that I couldn't count, but it might have been like 20 to 30 people. Some of them, and I don't know who these people are personally, but it's like I could feel like there was some sort of connection there. Like I knew who they were in the dream, but I can't tell you like, oh, this was this person, this was that person. And we were washing ashore from someplace. And when we got to the shore, it was like, it's kind of hard to describe, but it was like sand dunes and stuff with like sea flora kind of scattered throughout. But the colors were fluorescent though. So even though the sand was like maybe like this tan color and there was like dried up seaweed, coral or whatever, there were these animals that looked like hybrids of things like I've never seen and I might have to put this in a painting, but like a cross between a butterfly and a jellyfish together.
I'm trying to envision it.
Yeah. It was like, and it were those colors, and they were all scattered on the shore, and they were still, but they looked alive though, and they were moving like they weren't dead. But it was really interesting to see. So like stuff like that, or being on like the other side of an island and just being in the water and just kicking it and seeing the different shades of blue, and then being like, oh, how am I gonna get back up there? And then just ending up just back up there and moving around. And so it's all laced in there, even if it's not explicit, because some of my work is it's still abstract, but it's figurative, and then some of it is more so like completely abstract like that, even though you can intuit like, okay, those look like hills, this is obviously
you can kind of see pieces of
and a lot
different things.
And a lot of it, some of my work, it's very floral, so like even with the abstract shapes, like there are things that might look like a seed pod or like the side of a tulip or something. I've always
I feel like I'm stepping into the future with your work.
Stuff just comes. Like the courage comes, clarity comes, ideas come, freedom really. Like
exactly.
It's I definitely.
I like that you led with courage. Maya Angelou said courage is one of the greatest attributes to have, because without courage you can do nothing else.
You really though.
Yeah.
That's very true. It's a building block.
It is.
It is it has to be a cornerstone of how you move.
Because there's going to be things that come in your life that even the people closest to you don't understand. And they're going to say, you shouldn't do this or you should do that. And even while you're having those, dealing with other people kind of, and their responses and what they think you should or shouldn't do, you're going to be dealing with internally, should or not do this?
Right.
And then having to fight all of that. I know there's days that I wake up like that, and it's just like, no, I have to be courageous and fearless in that way. And not fearless in the sense that fear does not exist, but to fear less and not get stuck on the idea of fear, but to push past that.
Exactly. And I think that's something very important to remember, because sometimes we confuse courage with not being afraid.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, courage is what moves you, even if the fear is there.
Yeah.
But the mission, the integrity has to trump the fear.
Exactly.
And it's easier said than done. But at the same time, that's where it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think of Mike Tyson. He said that. He would say before he got into, and if you ever podcast, listen to Hot Boxing. I love Mike Tyson. Okay. I'm a big Mike Tyson fan. And for entertainment, if I don't have anything to do, I watch old Mike Tyson fights.
Okay.
So it's just what I love. But he said that he would get so scared before a fight, he would be on the toilet. And that was a part of what motivated him to win his fight so fast. Because he just wanted to destroy that person. And I experienced that when I was boxing. It was like, I would be so afraid before, like, okay, I have to step in this ring and fight somebody.
Yeah.
And it's like that every day when you have to get up and do something that it kind of gives you a little fear. Yeah. And now I think that I kind of like crave that fear, which is probably good and bad. Like, why do I do this? Why do I push myself in these ways? But if it's not a challenge, if it's something that I can just get up and do mindlessly, I'm not so interested in it. But if it's something that challenges me, then I'm like, all right, let's do this.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that right there is something very healthy.
Yeah.
And very admirable. Because at the same time, a lot of people, myself included at different times, like when the challenge is there, it's like, okay, is this an obstacle? Is this a sign that I don't need to do it? But it's like now, at least when it's healthy, it's like, no, like that's why you do it. Like, so you can have that involvement, so you can work synergetically with your body and to be involved fully in doing something. There's something very beautiful about that.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, when it's healthy, because you have to know yourself enough to be like, okay, this is not healthy for me. I can't do this, whatever it is. Or you have to know, like, this is a moment where I have to push past, and it's not that I'm pushing past where I should say I should fall back and not be pushing myself and stressing myself out. No, I'm pushing past so I can get to the other side and going back into that metaphoric crossing over, passing through to get to the other side.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's very important. We can scroll up a little bit.
Okay.
There's something I did want to touch on. Right there, dealing with and processing pain.
That's a good...
That was a graphic. I made that in 2020. So after I had, and I don't want to speak too much about this, but it ties in with this right here. When I was in the process of healing from my separation, I chose to journal, but I did it in like a self-therapy kind of context. And so when I went through the dealing with and processing pain, I got honest with myself about what I needed to do. And then I just started to format it with the graphics. And so the honoring yourself and emotions at every stage. Do not be afraid of solitude. Sometimes growth often requires isolation. And snaps. I can, snaps. Because I can genuinely say, just as a human, some of the most unwise decisions you will ever make will be out of fear of being alone. And that was something, especially with that being new, I had to remind myself, no, this is required for this season. And this is not an anomaly. This is where God is led. Just because you weren't given the next steps doesn't mean that you're not supposed to be here.
Right.
And so that was like off top. I had to remind myself of that. And then the next one below, be careful to not let pride and hurt drive your actions. Hurt people. Operate from a space of acceptance and then action. And so that was also very important because pride is also one of those things. Being okay. And I feel like so many people, especially particularly Black women, I really want to speak to y'all real quick specifically. Sometimes when it comes to, and because there's been a lot, one thing I have noticed, there's been a lot of talk about womanhood, femininity, how to be feminine, how to work more with being feminine, Black women having to balance masculine and feminine energy and leaning into their masculine for leadership things, all of that stuff. An important part of maintaining balance is also letting go of pride. And a part of that is allowing yourself to be vulnerable. And a part of that is letting people help you. We weren't made to do this by ourselves. We weren't made to do anything alone. And having a healthy relationship with independence and having a healthier relationship with interdependence, it is really, that might grant you some of the community you believe you're missing out on. When people offer to help you, even if it's with small things, even if it's helping you carry something, even if it's offering, hey, can we adjust this? Is it okay if we do X, Y, and Z? And you feel that pit in between your heart and your stomach where you're like, ooh, me accepting this is me basically admitting defeat, that I can't do this by myself. And that's a wound to pride. When you feel that and you're like, no, I can't. Right there, that's where you continue to block that softness and to block people in your lives, really, which is God coming through people, through love, through compassion, through community to help you. When you feel that right there, that's an opportunity to be courageous and to not let pride get in the way, accepting help from people and accepting that we have to have a healthy form of interdependence to heal, to thrive, to do anything. And that requires a certain level of vulnerability to access. And so the next one, have an active support system or a team. And I put in quotation marks importance of talk therapy or counseling. Enjoying solitude is healthy, and so is having help when you need it. And that one's pretty much self-explanatory. You know, when people say it takes a village, that's very true. And it just takes a village, period, whether you're raising children, whether you're building a business, just being a person. We need other people. Real life, it is. And then lastly, be honest with yourself and your support system. Processing pain requires humility and vulnerability. Because even when you have all of the help in the world, if you first cannot be honest with yourself about what you need and what you want, how can you expect anybody else to do that as well? How do we give direction when we need that, right? If we're not going to be honest about what we need first. And so that.
Yeah, no, I love that. Okay, so there's a few things that I want to kind of extract from what you were saying. And I think the first thing is going back to that idea of identity. And we were talking about that earlier. And it's like, for me, one of the things that I glean from our history as a people is that we were never an independent, fully independent, like, I got mine, I'm good type people. We were very much so interdependent and understood that we need one another. At the beginning of Dr. Joy DeGruy's book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, she talks about this idea of Caesarian and Guerra. She talks about this concept of how are the children. And she talks about her experience going to Africa and meeting with a group of people. And it was a woman that came in with a child, and immediately the rest of the village began to take care of this child. It wasn't like, oh, this is my child, don't touch my child. There was a trust there. We have to do that in this country because, of course, there's not that communal living aspect in our day-to-day life. Unless we build these relationships, then we kind of understand, okay, this person is trustworthy or this person is not. But in these villages, oftentimes in places like Africa or countries in Africa, there's this communal understanding that we're working together, we're going to protect each other. So the idea of Caesarian and Guerra is, how are the children? And asking that concept, not just like with kids, but how are the people as a whole? And a great judgment of how the people are, how are the children doing? And right now, you know, being somebody that works with children, whether it's after school programs, community centers, you know, school districts, it's like the children are not okay. And that means that the whole is not okay. That means the mothers and the fathers are not okay. The grandmothers are not okay. And how do we heal our people? And I think a big part of the healing is that community. And when we lose the community, we lose the process of healing. We lose, people are all on their own. And when you're in isolation, that's the biggest time that you can be under attack. It's the most vulnerable space that you can be when you're in isolation and you don't have the support you need. And now we're dealing with like the idea of people have to now glean from government, whereas we should be filling in for one another. We can't be, you know, dependent on systems to fix these issues that if the systems broke us, so how do we expect the system that broke us to not fix us? It's our responsibility to figure it out. So I like that you talk about that with your healing process here.
Because it starts, it really does start there. Because I'll always reiterate that, because it boils down to, okay, you know, having the wherewithal to want better for yourself and to have at least like learning the skills, because learning is a lifelong process. Like we're never going to stop doing that.
Never have the full answers.
Ever. And that's I'm learning to accept that is a very beautiful thing.
It is.
And that is a gift.
It's part of your humanity.
It very much so. And so it's just important to build those relationships, to build bridges and figure out, okay, how do we parent this way? How can I ask for help like this? How can I lean on people? How can I serve other people? Like, it's important to ask those questions. Always.
You did that yesterday for me. I thought that was so meaningful when you were like, do you want any banana bread that I made? And then I saw your Instagram that you actually like really made that. You didn't like use a mixture. Like, no, you like roasted these damn walnuts. Like, I was like, damn, like she really went in.
I'm good for that. I love, and it's little things like that. That's a part of why, okay, so I love to cook. And as of late, I've also loved baking. So that's something that's new for me. And so I'm starting with recipes that I grew up watching my mom make, and then kind of putting my own spin on things. You mean like, oh man. And so like this banana bread is my first banana bread that I've made. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you just had to cam it up. You did. And so, I was like, I was looking at, because I asked my mom, because she has the recipe written down. It's somewhere in our kitchen. I couldn't find it, but she was like, it's very simple. And so I found one online that was, parallel to it. And I'm reading through it, and I always do this. So even if I find a recipe, I'm like, okay. I'm gonna do this instead, actually.
Right.
Or like, I'm gonna add this, or like, for example, like it called for like half a cup of chopped nuts.
Mm-hmm.
That's so general, it's so basic. I'm like, okay, I have blanched almonds. I have
almonds.
I have pecans. I think, okay, so I'm gonna put my pecans and everything in there. I was like, you know what? Ooh, I was like, okay, what if I roasted them though?
Yeah, exactly. I'm like looking at your Instagram, like she really roasted these almonds.
Yeah, and because it makes a difference, because they're aromatic. So like when you put them in the pan, a little bit of olive oil, and you just kind of let them sit and do their thing, then the kitchen smells amazing. Yeah. Like, because I did that and like let it sizzle for a little bit, because you don't want to like cook them through. You just want to brown them a little bit. Put some cane sugar on them and let them stir a little bit. Put some it's not even a secret, it's vanilla, you can smell it. Put a little bit of vanilla in there, let it sit for a little bit longer, just a little bit of water to make them softer, because they're gonna, because when they cook down, the texture's gonna change a little bit, so they're more chewy. But you put a little bit of water in the pan first to soak, because I'll soak them before I cook them, but then while they're cooking, put a little bit of water, so that's the steam.
See what I'm saying? It's a whole process.
It's a whole process. Like make the steam together.
Well, Viola Davis, she talks about in her book, which I loved her book. I'm a big Viola Davis fan. I love her stuff.
As well. I've been watching a lot of Viola Davis content.
Like what? Like How to Get Away with Murder type stuff, or like
not only that, but like, so I watched the show finally, and I finished the show, and what a show, to say the least.
There's a lot in there. Yeah.
So much. But even on YouTube, I've never watched, because I've seen a lot of stuff that she's been in, but I've never listened to just her speak.
And she's powerful,
so powerful, elegant, graceful, witty, just everything. Like, I want to meet this woman, and just say thank you. Like, just in an interview setting, I've never seen her shine like that. Yeah. And honestly, like, I could say, like, my favorite role that I've seen her play is just her. Just being herself. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, this woman is incredibly just beautiful, talented, just in the way she like holds herself and carries herself. I'm just like, oh man. Yeah. Just she's great.
Yeah, it's so interesting, because like I've talked to a few friends about that show, and I forget why I even mentioned her name now. Viola Davis. Oh, I'll go there real quick. Okay, she talks about her when she met her husband, and she just put out like all the things that she wanted, her checklist of a man, and what she said she'd do. She wanted an older man that has already had kids, so she does, because she ended up having surgery, so I think it was her fibroids or something like that, and so she just was like, just take it all out, and so she can't have kids, and so she wanted this, like, and she wanted a Southern man, like a big guy, and she ends up meeting her husband like weeks later. Wow. And which I thought was amazing. And in her book, she talks about her journey as a child growing up and really struggling through life, growing up incredibly poor, going to school smelling like pee because she wet the bed often, even going into older years that you should not be wetting the bed anymore due to probably trauma and all of that. And it's interesting when I talk to people about Viola Davis films, or it's such you'll get either, I hate How to Get Away with Murder, the idea of black woman with this and that, or I love the representation of this black woman in How to Get Away with Murder, or even like her in The Help, or whatever. She does challenging roles. Fences, where you're playing this wife of, talk about August Wilson, trauma and tragedy of blackness. Like, I love that she is able to portray all these people.
Yeah, she has range.
She has such range.
She's real.
It's incredible.
And at one of the, like, oh my gosh, and I'm paraphrasing, but one of the most, like, intriguing things I've heard this woman say was talking about the way that she views acting, not only as an art, but, like, it's my job as an actor to reflect you back to you. Right. That's what my job is. If you don't like what you see, like, that's something that belongs to you. Like, I'm not trying to just, do something because it's fun and because I because this is what you want to see.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to reflect you back to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is a loose interpretation. So
no, I got you, and I think other people will understand.
Right, but like that's essentially what she was saying, and I was like, and that's a part of why I love How to Get Away with Murder.
Yeah.
Because really, like as I'm consuming the show, also just real quick tidbit because I have the thing to say about August Wilson with Fences. One of the things I loved about Fences, because I remember even studying that in theater class, and so reading through the screenplay and acting out certain roles, and then studying like, and we even got to watch one of the like original productions like of the play. Like, it was really cool.
I heard it was amazing. My mom went to see the play back in the day, and she said it was amazing. Yeah.
And one of my favorite things about Fences was that, like, it's literally it's just the cast of these like mostly two people, like right, this man and a woman. And even though it's, of course, being told through the lens of these Black Americans, I love that the racism and the racial trauma in the show was something that went without saying. It was very like a show, not a tell. And I think that added a beautiful sense of realism to what life was like with people. Because I think sometimes things can be so heavily sensationalized with storytelling. Because in some ways, I feel like sometimes we can be afraid to just let stories speak for themselves.
We gotta explain it.
We have to explain it, right?
Yeah.
But I love that was a very show, not tell type of movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's racism, relationships, the trauma, the sacrifices that people make to make things work and to try. It was just, it was beautiful. It definitely got brought to tears every time that I've seen that movie.
Like you understood. You didn't see him go to work or do the things, but you saw him at home and you understood his response to the life that he had to live outside of that setting and then coming back to that space and what that experience was. And if you grew up in a Black home with a father, then you kind of really got it. Like, my dad he worked as a printer. You know, like he grew up in foster care.
Okay.
You know, orphaned at a young age, taking care of his brother, and then working as a printer for a white man his whole life. Like, so you get that context of, like, when he gets home, this is his one space. This is his one castle, you know, his space that he can actually be a man. Or feel like he's a man fully and not have to, like, deal with the white gaze and all that. But it wasn't said in the film or in the play. It was just, like you said, it was implicitly shown.
Yeah. And I love that about the story, how he tells the story.
Yeah.
And then with How to Get Away with Murder, it's like when the show came out, Yes, that's probably. I think that's the only show from her that I've really watched like that. Because of course everyone knows Grey's Anatomy, everyone knows Scandal, and I didn't really watch either of these shows. I kind of want to go back and check out both really. When I have the time.
I binged Grey's only because my best friend was like, it's my favorite show, so I binged it for her, so we could talk about it.
Then I'll have to get on that. And with this show, I had no idea what kind of a wild ride I was in for. Because I remember when it first came out, I wasn't allowed to watch it. Obviously, it's college. They're like not even college, but law students, and I was fairly young when the show came out. Too young for their core audience, probably. Yeah. And so I remember seeing like clips of the very beginning, but not really understanding what was going on. And I didn't watch it long enough to get any of the story, so I just kind of let it go. Right. And then years later, now, like literally 10 years later, I'm like, you know what? I think I'm going to go back and watch the show. Actually, a couple people had recommended it to me. It was on Netflix. Yeah. I had never seen it. I like Viola Davis. So like, let me just see what this show is about. I was immediately hooked and just ate it. Just ate it up. And I could go, oh my gosh. There needs to be like a Reddit chat for How to Get Away with Murder. And
there probably is.
You know, there probably like some sort of a Discord. Like I need a support group.
We need to process. We need to talk about this.
No, really don't, because I'm still not over it. I'm just like, if I think about it too much, I cry.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh. But the complexity, the rawness, in more ways than one, the raunchiness of the show.
In more ways than one.
Pushing the envelope. It's like, because as I'm watching it, I'm just consuming, right? Yeah. And I'm like, okay, taking time to digest. But then even after completely finishing it, and then going back and rewatching certain things, I'm like, oh, okay, because everything, when you rewatch stuff, you always catch stuff you didn't see the first time. That's why I love going back a couple times and being like, oh, this just for the sake of getting the story together and the little bits and pieces and the hints of everything. Like, I don't want to spoil it for people that haven't seen it, but as I'm rewatching the show and I'm seeing these bits of dialogue and I'm like, I need to further story points, I'm like, oh, the writers were really good.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And then hearing the cast talk about it afterwards,
Mm-hmm.
and even hearing Viola reflecting on how like revolutionary the show was as far as representation was concerned.
Yeah.
Because she said she ran into some people feeling like Annalise was casted incorrectly,
Mm.
and that was interesting. And of course, she elaborated on that because
Yeah.
I was wondering, because my mind went to a certain space, and so I was wondering if that was where she was as well. And that was true, because Annalise Keating she's very powerful. She's very sexy.
Mm-hmm.
She's very vulnerable. She's conniving.
Mm-hmm.
She's manipulative. She's
You love and hate her.
She's
at
like,
the same
you love,
time.
exactly. You love, like, I'm rooting for her, but then I'm like, dang, really?
Yeah.
That's what we're doing right now? And then here, and also Cicely Tyson.
Oh,
Sorry, she's one of my favorite.
Mama
people.
Cicely.
Mama
Oh.
Cicely.
You got to read her book too. That's a really good one.
I do.
Yeah,
I do need to read
so
her
good.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah, her character. Oh my. Anyway, okay, so with Viola being not casted correctly, but talking about like redefining what sexy meant, like as a woman that I believe was in her like late 40s, early 50s,
Mm-hmm.
and navigating these spaces, and you know, her being in a relationship and you know, just being caught up in these different situations, and having people literally in love with her and
Mhm.
enamored and
Mhm.
fascinated with her essence, with her person, like
Mhm.
everything. And I don't think people were used to seeing a woman who looked like her, a dark-skinned woman who is built, a
Mhm.
dark-skinned African-American woman
Mm-hmm.
who has all of the attributes that she does,
Mhm.
being categorized as sexy. One of the things I loved about that show is that even though, like, of course we're having a conversation about it now, so we're breaking down the mechanics of what the character called for, when you're actually watching the show, you're just watching a story being told.
Right.
So you're not even, you know, it's not even coming into play like, oh, black person here, white person there. Insert, you know, the Latino people, insert the this and the that, insert the, you know, it didn't feel like you were watching a space where they were trying to fill a quota
Mm-hmm.
of any sort.
No.
You were just watching a story being told with these dynamic characters that just so happen to fit into these different spaces,
Yeah.
and that also completely break down so much of what we are made to believe they represent in a
Mhm.
lot of ways. And that's a part of why I love that show so much. Just the story, it's so good.
It really is. I mean,
it was
especially the way it's
intense.
written. I had a friend of mine that kind of challenged my thoughts with it. Of,
Okay, let's hear
yeah, right.
Right, I'm like, let's hear it. Let's
Little
go.
fishback, I guess.
Uh-huh.
She was talking about the over sexualization of the black male and
Okay.
the lover that she had. What's his name?
Nate Leahy.
Nate. You're like Nate.
Nate Leahy.
And just like how black men are seen as like a sex object,
Okay.
and how he played the part of he has sex with her,
Mm-hmm.
and then she has these other, I guess, more intimate relationships, but he is the person that she goes to have sex with,
Mm-hmm.
which I think that she got more out of that relationship than sex, and I think that that's played out over time.
Yeah.
It was a part of it, and that is how he is introduced,
Mhm.
because he's like this incredibly like built black man
Mhm.
that everybody
quite
knows
handsome.
is like the closest thing to God.
Yeah.
So it's like it's just like that's just how it's laid out. And she kind of challenged me with that, and I thought about it, still kind of processing it, but I want to see your thoughts with that.
With that, honestly, I feel like, okay, because I have a few thoughts on this. One of my first things is that, because I understand that sentiment. However, at the same time, I think it's important to remember that when we're telling stories, sometimes people do fit into categories.
Absolutely.
Sometimes you do have people in your life, if you're having casual relationships, that it just serves that purpose.
Right.
If that's what you're doing. And so if we're telling a story and there's a woman who's balancing different types of relationships, personally, especially having watched the entirety of the show, I just saw two, you know, humans, even though it was unhealthy, you know,
Yeah.
but it's seeking connection,
Yeah.
though, and seeking intimacy. And so I think reducing his role to that really shows, at least just for me, and this is no discredit to your friend, just a lack of perspective with how people are represented over the course of a project.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in some ways that kind of denies people their humanity, because is sex not a part of seeking connection, even if we're not doing it in the ways that are the most, healthy, thought out. At the end of the day, that is what people are trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was just, at least the way that I was looking at it, that was another way of Annalise's character pursuing that, and also Nate's character pursuing that, because then we find out more about his story and what he's going through with his, the different relationships that he has, with the women in his life. And I will say, though, I do think it was an interesting parallel to have the husband who's white and who's this professor and who's this renowned, whoever, and then the quote-unquote side piece is this built black man in the middle of this Black love is everything type of era. I did find that juxtaposition interesting. And I don't know what, and of course, I don't know what the original screenplay or what the original casting direction was supposed to be for, but the way that it played out, I kind of like that it shook that up a little bit.
Yeah.
We kind of talked about this before, but about the responsibility of Black artists and what is quote unquote Black art, and what do I need to be depicting as an artist to be valid, to be helping my community, is Black art, or and as an artist who's a little bit more abstract, that was definitely something that I struggled with, because I was like, who's gonna want to look at my work? All everyone wants to see, and mind you, this was my own skewed thinking at the time, but all everyone wants to see, okay, in order for it to be Black art that's important for the culture, for the conversation, it has to be either Black women marching or Black men being shot. It has to be either a Black family doing this or Black kids playing in the water. And nothing is expressly wrong or inherently wrong with any of those images. But it was okay, in order for something to be Black, it had to be figurative, it had to be representational explicitly with these very specific things. But not taking into account that the representation of consciousness coming from the lens of someone who's viewing the world, even if you start biblically, even if you start spiritually, even if you start, you can go through the different lenses, but, you still end up, as a Black person occupying this space. Some of my experiences is colored, through that. So my subconscious, my consciousness, naturally it's just going to come, it's going to bleed through. So what is more Black art than just that? Not, for the sake of itself, not as a means to prove a point, not demanding anything, not trying to impose my will, but to just be and to share and to reflect that which is deepest within me. What is more authentic than that? And that's God right there. What is more authentic than that? And so the answer to that is nothing. And that's a large part of my own, just artistic philosophy with how I choose to make art. And so after making peace with that, I stopped caring. And I'm like, you know what? Whoever's going to resonate with my work is going to resonate with it. Because my work is the most intimate part of myself that I can give to anyone at this point. Because it is me. This is my innermost thoughts, feelings, processes, values, prayers, everything. It's there. And so I'm like, what's more me than that?
Yeah. And I think that on that note, that's the perfect kind of point to kind of wrap this up, because I started Black folk art talking about the souls of Black folk. What is it? What represents the soul of our community, of the people of the diaspora? What are we creating? And it's not necessarily about, like you said, representative or figurative paintings or things that show our community in some way. It could be the abstract, it can be the landscape, it can be so many different things that represent our community and our creativity, our culture. And so it's really looking at what is in our soul, what is coming out of us, not the brownness that is on the outside, but what is on the inside. And I think that you do a really good job of that with your art. I think it's going to continue to grow.
Thank you. And honestly, it feels even honoring to hear you say that, because I love a lot of your philosophy about art and just how what it is, really, and that creative process and the value of that. So to hear you say that, I'm just like, oh, my heart.
Thank you. Well, it's true. It's definitely true. All right.
Thank you, girl.
We're Black Folk Art here with Kámbrya Bailey. Did I pronounce your name right?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Yep, Kámbrya Bailey. Just
all right.
Straight through. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
This was fun.
This was fun.
This was like.
We gotta do it again.
Oh, definitely.
And we didn't just do
Next time.
art. We did art and culture, which I'm happy about that.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's definitely necessary.
Yeah.
It's needed.
Yeah. It's intertwined. All right. That's it. We're good.